Lecture 1, Part 2. Why did humans migrate out of Africa? Around 100,000 years ago, some humans began to migrate out of Africa, but we are still trying to understand why they may have done this. Most species stay in the environment to which they have become adapted. But when humans left Africa, they settled in different environments, which must have presented a great challenge. They were used to the warm grasslands, but settled sometimes in forests or in cold climates, even crossing deserts and seas, which demanded the development of new technologies. Even though the evidence can be patchy in places, archaeologists can construct where and when these humans travelled and peopled the various parts of the earth. Another way to measure this is through the testing of blood samples from modern humans, which can also tell us about patterns of migration. Language differences are also important, because the longer a group was out of touch with other humans, the more differences would occur in a language. But this is not terribly precise, because humans are rarely out of contact with other groups for long, and migrations and movements have continued throughout recorded history. Through a combination of these various methods, however, researchers are fairly sure that the first Homo sapiens colonized the Middle East around 100,000 years ago. But that colony failed, and it was about 40,000 years after that that a new migration established a colony in the Middle East. Settlement proceeded along the coasts of Asia and Africa, with human groups living as beachcombers, moving very slowly, perhaps a few miles each year, as they depleted resources in one area. The earliest agreed upon evidence for Homo sapiens in China is from 67,000 years ago. One of the most surprising things about human migration is how early they took to the seas. These early men had sufficient nautical technology to colonize Australia around 50,000 years ago, and humans reached Europe about the same time. Northern Asia and America were much colder, and humans migrated into them much more slowly. The generally agreed upon date for this is around 15,000 years ago. The most remarkable thing about this human migration is the numbers of people involved. Remember from the last lecture that at the time of Eve, 150,000 years ago, Eve, our common genetic ancestress, humans only numbered about 20,000, or the size of the student body at St. John's. Well, by the time they had populated most of the habitable Old World, their numbers can be estimated to have been in the millions. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether this population growth was the cause or the effect of the migration. Did humans migrate because of population pressure, or did migration bring about the conditions whereby the population could grow? Foraging communities, such as these early migrants, needed to be highly mobile. Because a mother can carry no more than 1 or 2 children, large families are not suited to foraging life. Foragers therefore limit the number of children by regulating mating with rules about who can mate with whom. And the main contraceptive method that had developed in humans was a long lactation period, in which women were relatively infertile. Foraging communities, therefore, are usually quite demographically stable. They don't tend to grow. So we need to look closely at the different arguments that have been proffered to explain this population growth in the migration period. Cooking with fire has been suggested as a possible answer. Cooked food is much more digestible to us humans. We have short intestines, a single stomach, a weak jaw and blunt teeth. So cooked food is just easier to eat. Cooking also increases the range of foods we could manage to eat. Cooking renders some foods edible to us. The first indisputable evidence for man cooking with fire occurs 150,000 years ago, which coincides nicely with the start of the population growth. But was this man's first experience of cooking with fire? Some experts do not believe so. Some think we might have started to cook with fire around 2 million years ago. which explains the physiological differences in man at this time, when humans developed shorter, blunter teeth. But conclusive evidence of this is yet to be found. We cannot be sure when another method of increasing food supply began, and this was the making of driving lanes and corrals to herd grazing animals ready for the kill. We do have evidence that they were used 150,000 years ago, but we don't know if they were used before this. Another method of increasing food production was the use of fire-hardened spears. Thus, more food, through cooking and better hunting, may explain the population growth at this time, and thus the migration. On a less positive note, however, some experts believe that humans migrated not because of plenty, but because of necessity, as they faced war, plague, famine, and natural disaster, the biblical 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Some experts believe that scarcity drove people to move. They migrated because of food shortages or ecological disasters, and this drove them to find new food sources. There is, however, little evidence to support this theory, and food shortages usually lead to declining, not increasing, populations. And the same can be said of plague, but not necessarily of war. War can spur humans to new responses, which may have ultimately led to population growth. We don't know when war first started. Some believe it is part of the condition of man to be violent and aggressive, while others believe that humans are essentially peaceful until competition corrupts them. The first proof we have of a large-scale human war dates back only to 11,000 years ago at Jebel Sabah on the border of modern Egypt and Sudan, where the victims of war included women and children. Many of these had very savage wounds. One woman was stabbed 20 times. At this time, in this place, agriculture had just begun, and some experts believe that settled agricultural communities engendered warfare as competition increased for the physical control of land which hadn't been there before. Some experts believe war to be much older than that, and point to gang warfare among chimpanzees communities in West Africa, which were documented in the 1970s by primate expert Jane Goodall. In chimpanzee communities, when a group tries to splinter away from the main group tries to kill them, and the splinter group has to escape far away to be safe. Perhaps human migrations work like this too. But we still come back to the question of why people may have divided and why they may have fought each other. Rising population, increasing competition for resources, which also includes the assumption of scarcity, or some inherent animal aggression in humans have been posited as reasons why people may have divided and fought each other. One more thing needs to be considered when thinking about humans migrated, and this is male domination. Among all primates, competitiveness in mating has produced larger, stronger males compared to females. And in ape societies, alpha males boss around these societies. In human societies, however, closer bonds are formed among males, and stronger alliances between males and females. Biologically speaking, women, who carry the next generation, are more valuable to societies than men. And this is why men have traditionally fought wars, in the majority of human societies anyway. And this is also the reason why the female principle of the goddess was revered as sacred in many early human societies. The connection between menstruation and the moon would not have been lost on early humans. In this environment, male domination was not necessarily an obvious step for humanity. We need not assume that migrating groups were dominated by men. Perhaps the process of migration, however, did solidify gender roles, because women would be more likely to carry the children they were nursing. Thus, because they were carrying a small child, they concentrated on the gathering side of the food supply equation, whereas men who were not carrying the small child were freer to hunt down the prey, or thus the theory goes. We should not necessarily derive from this any relative importance that was attached to gathering or hunting. Gathering actually provided about 2/3 of the nutrition of these people, and hunting only about 1/3. What is important is that if this gender specialization of labor in gathering food occurred by the migration period, women did not have to hunt to live. They just had to gather, and they could do this while holding a child. Thus, they had more liberty to bear more children, and this might explain the population growth. We do not know when this gender specialization of labor began, or how rigid or widespread it was, but it does go a long way towards explaining how migration was possible and how the accompanying demographic changes could also have occurred. But both hunting and gathering were essential parts of this equation. These several suggestions raised here may well have developed simultaneously, and thus it may be not possible to point to one over the other as a cause of the first population boom. The management of grazing animals through the use of fire, driving lanes, and corrals led to a greater control over the food supply and more food available for consumption. Other hunting techniques, such as fire-hardened spears, could also improve diet. And cooking with fire improved digestibility of food and increased the range of food people could eat. And finally, the sexual specialization of labor, with men hunting and women gathering, freed up women for more childbearing and child carrying and gathering at the same time, and